Hey there, I'm Dr. Barbara Woods, and welcome to the live stream for today, or if you're listening to the replay, let me know in the comments. So my streaming software is having a little bit of a conflict with one of my Facebook groups, so I can't stream directly into the group. So I have to do this really awkward time right now and wait for it to come up on my page, and then I have to share it. So it's already up, and I will do this awkward sharing. In the meantime, I'm not sure if you can hear in the background, but Mr. Bjorn, my 7-month-old Bernie Doodle, is not very happy right now. We're working on some training, and so I'm working on kenneling, going through the doors well and placement, because eventually in about 9 months, we're hoping to start the process of doing therapy dog training. So he's kenneled right now, and I don't really feel like I have to kennel him because he's such a good dog and he doesn't get into anything while I'm doing this. But I kenneled him today and he has been barking for half an hour. So he might have a very long morning because I can't take him out until he stops. So now everything is shared. We're ready to go. So today we're going to talk about 5 states that parents experience related to intergenerational trauma. And this is related to my intergenerational trauma program, which is a 3-phase intervention for treating intergenerational trauma. The first phase is parent coaching to kind of calm the family nervous system, help the parent understand the child's behavior, trauma, attachment, and give them the skills to really support the child and to kind of get to the root of some of the difficulties that they're having with the child due to the impact of trauma and intergenerational trauma. And then phase 2 is where we work through the parent's unresolved complex trauma. So this material is related to phase 2. And then phase 3 is working directly with the child or teenager to address their trauma experience and to build some family resilience. And it also has like a parent coaching refresher that was from phase 1 to just kind of refresh those skills. So we are going to talk about these different states, and it's really important to understand this because intergenerational trauma, it directly impacts parenting skills because it's rooted in complex developmental trauma that the parent experienced when they were younger. So it has a direct experience on their child development when they were a child, attachment, and several other domains. But when a parent has a history of complex developmental trauma, they may not have experienced effective or healthy parenting. So they don't have a working model to go from, because that's usually where we learn our attachment strategies, our parenting strategies. We usually learn them in the context of the family or extended family, and then they get carried on down to other generations. So if a parent hasn't had a corrective experience where they've been able to earn security in relationships, so that means they've been able to develop a secure attachment style where they don't get anxious about the relationship, and if they're connected when they're apart from each other, they don't avoid closeness or relationships or attachment. And they don't have this kind of push-pull between, I want you to be in a relationship with me, but it's so terrifying that I push you away. So that earned security is extremely important because the research shows if a parent who has attachment disruptions can gain that earned security through relationships after their own childhood or even during their childhood, it can be developed. So it's a experience and skill that it can be developed in relationships with friends, partners, therapists. So it's really important to know that these difficulties with attachment and the developmental impacts of intergenerational trauma, they're not permanent. So this is part of how we help support the parents. So the presence of one supportive adult in a child's life can be a significant shift for the child. So even if the parents have had one person who is supportive and caring, they may be able to earn that security, and then they may be able to develop the skills that are more effective for parenting. So one of the most significant impacts of intergenerational trauma during adulthood is those parenting skills. So most parents they're dedicated to their kids. They want things to be different. They want to improve their parenting from what they may have experienced. But if they haven't gotten to that place of earned security, their healing may be linked in the relationship to the child. So they may feel like, I have to do this right. If I can raise my child and parent better than I was parented, then I've overcome that history. And sometimes that puts a lot of pressure on the parent, a lot of pressure on the child, and a lot of pressure on their relationship. So this is a skill deficit or problem rather than, this isn't a character trait. It's not a motivational problem. So this isn't something that's wrong internally with the person. This is an experience that they've had that prevented skills to develop. And there's a reliable and predictable sequence of difficulties that will happen when there's relationship disruptions that these parents will experience. So I refer to these as parenting states, and they're actually directly linked to the polyvagal ladder or polyvagal theory, where we look at social engagement, fight or flight, and freeze responses. And you can see these chronic patterns of dysregulation in really anybody. This is for therapists too. If we don't take care of ourselves, we have the same exact pattern. So these patterns are related to autonomic regulation or dysregulation, and the parenting experiences are occurring on a regular basis. So they end up having kind of a dominant experience or strategy and don't have the flexibility to move between these states. These states are normal and natural. They're adaptive. So if a parent will say is fearful, it might be an actual fear that is supported by the whatever environment they're living in. It may be dangerous or lacks safety. So they may have a level of fear that is adaptive and expected for their experience. The difficulty is if they get stuck in one of these parenting states and they don't have the flexibility or the skills to move up and down that polyvagal ladder with some flexibility. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the courageous parent, or the courageous parent state, which is a ventral vagal for my polyvagal peeps. That's a state where you're calm, collected, your thoughts are clear, you can connect with other people. So this parent in this state would approach a child's behavior with curiosity. They'd be interested in what's happening, and they'd be compassionate. They also have more confidence in their parenting strategies, and they can be flexible in them. So they can identify, in one situation, they can identify the most effective strategy for that problem behavior, and they can shift and adjust as they need to help support the child. So they may have brief moments of anxiety related to the child's behavior, but they're quickly able to stay present and identify effective strategies for that certain incident or that situation that they're in. They also will have openness with other people, so family, friends, teachers, other professionals. They'll be able to discuss things, get feedback. They'll be open to feedback. So there's not a level of defensiveness or kind of not wanting to talk about what they're going through or talking about it too much. So they have a solid framework of parenting strategies to understand the behavior and to support their child, it's become nearly automatic. So these are really fluid skills that they're able to use in a variety of situations. So the next one is a connected parent state. And this is a mix for my polyvagal friends. This is a mix of ventral vagal with some sympathetic kind of dropping into that anxiety or kind of having a little bit of sympathetic activation. So the connected state, they have compassion for their child's behavior. They understand the behavior from a trauma-informed perspective, but they have a lot more anxiety or discomfort related to the behavior. So they're not as confident as the courageous parent, and they can have some anxiety and discomfort, not really knowing which strategies or skills are the best to address behavior. So they may kind of struggle with knowing which skills to use in which situations. But they consistently return to effective parenting skills despite this discomfort. So they have the flexibility to get uncomfortable, to kind of drop down that polyvagal ladder and use regulation strategies to kind of move back up and get back into that connected, safe state of their autonomic nervous system. So when we move down the polyvagal ladder and we get into sympathetic energy or activation, we're going to look at flight energy first, because that's usually kind of the progression of it. And this is the fearful parent state, where they're really anxious and worried about their parenting and their child's behavior. So they're not confident at all in their parenting skills. They're quickly overwhelmed when they're faced with parenting challenges. So this is really difficult. They want to do really well, but they're overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. So they have a little touch of fear and anxiety. So over time, they may withdraw from professionals and friends who may be able to support them because they may not want people to know they're struggling. And this is a valid fear, because some of the parents that we're working with are involved with child welfare agencies, and they feel like some bad thing is going to happen if they aren't a perfect parent. But there are no perfect parents. So they may kind of tuck into themselves and avoid discussing it because there's some things that may cause them to feel fearful. The flip side of that is they may frantically seek out support and strategies due to the awareness. They know they're struggling, and they may ask everybody for how to manage this. And then they get all this conflicting information, and it really doesn't help them to develop the skills and strategies they need for certain circumstances with their child. So as the progression of the polyvagal ladder goes more into sympathetic and we hit that fight energy, which is a normal response to really difficult situations, we'll get the frustrated parent state. So this is where a parent gets very reactive to a child's behavior. They may not have the ability to intervene to change the behavior. And this is where you'll hear parents say, this kid is riding my last nerve and I can't stand it. So that's kind of a red flag that they may be kind of in that sympathetic or fight activation state. So they may even have thoughts of giving up on parenting. They're so frustrated that they feel like they can't do this anymore. And they're unable, they may have learned parenting skills, but they're unable to put them into action when they need to because of the level of frustration. They just can't think clearly. They're not regulated. They're not in that social engagement where they have the confidence to implement these strategies. So there's a lot of frustration. They end up lacking sometimes compassion for the child, especially when they're experiencing emotional or attachment needs. So sometimes children that are in this context of intergenerational trauma, they'll have really high attachment needs, or um, they'll have that kind of come here, go away, or I need you. And then once you're close to them, they kind of go on the defense and fight against the relationship. So these are really difficult things. And when a child has an attachment need, if the parent doesn't have that earned security, and say they're kind of avoidant styles or strategies that the parent uses, this is going to be a pretty high demand from a child that is going to further frustrate the parent. But their normal developmental needs and emotional and attachment needs. So this can start a cycle in the parent-child relationship where there's a lot of reactivity on both, on the child and the parent. So over time, if this pattern continues or gets stuck in this frustrated state, you can see really harsh or aggressive parenting where they're kneeling in corners for hours, or there's like corporal punishment, spanking, all those things, or even verbal kind of put downs or verbal control. Because they're so frustrated that they've kind of reached the last of what they know how to do. And those skills of being more harsh or aggressive are usually kind of the last stage of this frustration. So a collapsed or shut down state for a parent is that dorsal vagal. So that's just kind of numbing out, being disconnected, not being able to put things together. They're just kind of going through the motions. So what happens over time is this is just kind of, if you stay in a frustrated or highly activated sympathetic state for a long time, your autonomic nervous system is just going to kind of shut that down so that it protects you and kind of regulates, but it causes more problems. So over time, these parents may really lose hope or foresight. They can't see the future. They can't see their child going to school or graduating from school or getting married or whatever those hopes and dreams are that they have for their relationship with the child. They're really stuck in the here and now and just really struggle to even do anything because they're way too overwhelmed with their own attachment needs or impacts of the intergenerational trauma and with their child's behavior and attachment needs. So they may be no longer interested in learning new skills. They may be difficult to engage in therapy, and they're just trying to get by with the day-to-day struggles of kind of escalated attachment disruptions in both themselves and the child. So they may become disconnected from the child. They won't attend to emotional, behavioral, or attachment needs. They may engage in behaviors that help numb out any kind of dysregulation or uncomfortable feelings. So you'll see substance abuse. You may see relationships that kind of cycle, or a lot of relationships that don't last very long. So this helps them kind of not feel numb or to feel alive, but it can totally conflict with parenting responsibilities. So this can get in kind of a neglectful state. They may not be attending to the kids' needs. They may leave the home and leave the kids there. So there's some kids that are in foster care because the parent has left and can't stay in that situation because they're just too shut down and they're looking for ways to cope in their ways that aren't around the children. So they may actually even ask family members to take care of the kids. They may, and this is different than having an overnight for a break for a parent. they want the family to raise the kids, or they just don't feel like they can do this, or they may voluntarily place the child in foster care. So this one is the most significant state. It's going to have the most impacts on both the parent and the child. And we really need to be aware of these states when we're working with intergenerational trauma, because it allows the therapist to tailor interventions related to what the parent is experiencing in the most effective intervention for that state. So effective interventions in that sympathetic or fight or flight is to mobilize and move that energy. So an appropriate thing for them to do would be to go out and walk with your child, or play kind of play rough, or have high energy, play with your child, do things that mobilize that energy. But if we don't know these states and we tell a shutdown parent to try to mobilize that energy, and it's not done in a gentle way that brings their awareness kind of back to the present and helps them not be in a kind of numb or disconnected state, it's just going to cause more overwhelm, because they're going to be like, oh my God, I do everything I can. I can't handle this. And you're telling me to just play with my kid. And play is so important. But in these later states, they kind of don't understand why play is so important. But it's that mobilization of energy. It's the connection with the child. But we have to be able to match our interventions with where the parent is in these states, because the interventions we might recommend maybe will make the situation worse, which we don't want to do. So if we can tailor these interventions to the state that the parent is experiencing, it supports the parent to make a lot more progress. They can regain hope if they can get kind of some relief of that uncomfortable state that they're experiencing in the context of the parent-child relationship. They feel hopeful that this could work, and they're more likely to engage in therapy or to implement the suggestions that are made in the strategies. And it helps them heal and transform, because part of the healing for intergenerational trauma is healing this parent-child relationship and addressing the caregiver's unresolved trauma. So one of the best parts of using polyvagal theory and kind of placing these parenting states within that polyvagal ladder is that it helps the parent and it helps the child understand that their responses they're expected and they're adaptive. So some of the parents that we're working with, if anybody was in the situation they were in, they would be fearful, they would be frustrated, or they would collapse, because they are having a normal adaptive response to the conditions in the situation that they're in. And they didn't have the experiences because of their own childhood or developmental trauma to be able to to be more flexible and not get kind of stuck in those different states. So this approach moves it really away from pathology or diagnosis. We're not looking at diagnosing the parent with like an explosive disorder because they get enraged with their child. It's not looking at diagnosis or judgment of the parent. It's really looking at where is your nervous system and how can we get that to shift so you have more flexibility, so that when there is something that's truly dangerous or that you need to get away from, or you're just exhausted at the end of the day, that you can experience those other states without getting stuck. You have more flexibility and you really have a lot more resilience. So there you have it. These are the 5 states that parents may experience when they're impacted by intergenerational trauma, and how those are related to autonomic states. So I hope this helps support your journey. And I do have a PDF that I can give you if you message me. I will send it to you through probably Facebook Messenger, or if you want me to email it to me, just send me your email address. And it summarizes these states for you to work with your own clients. So I hope this is helpful, and I hope you have a beautiful day.